Hello all. Thank you all for joining us today for our webinar. My name is Kyra Russell. I'm the Director of Sales here at Exude. Today we're going to be talking about leading how work is worked, looking at the effort, art, science scale. I have two people here with me today, Isaac Jones and Dan Gallagher. Dan, do you want to kick us off and introduce yourself for a moment?
Yeah, thanks, Kyra. Excited to spend the time with you and Ike today and all of our listeners. Really talking about how work can change over time and the leader's role and kind of thinking about it proactively and then managing through any transformation, change, or transition. So I work alongside you and many other of our great teammates in our Exude work and excited to kind of bring my experiences, not only working kind of across talent and transformation at different larger and small companies, both for-profit, nonprofit, but also even as a aspiring athlete still and a parent. We'll bring it into those three facets of how does it play out in business, how does it play out in athletics, and then in parenting as well.
Absolutely. That's a great overview. And before we jump into the intro here with Isaac, I'll give just a little bit more color to the entire conversation. I think that'll be a perfect time for Ike to jump in. So in today's conversation, we're going to be looking over a couple of key points, understanding some of those key differences between effort, art, and science, and how each one plays into one another. And then thinking about how we can help ourselves, help others in our organizations in readiness and intentionality and employing all three of those facets. And then what are those key moments of self-awareness that drive us from one to the next? How do you know when it's time to shift from effort to art to science? And recognizing those patterns. So I think this is a great place to jump in and let Ike give a little intro of himself as well, because he has a lot of experience in all of these facets.
Thank you so much for having me, both Dan, Kyra, and the group at Exude. This is a wonderful opportunity. Personally and professionally, I really work with a lot of skilled and successful individuals, helping them utilize their available resources really to create opportunities in the life that they want. Very similar to what Exude does, but just in a different capacity. And so I'm excited to kind of share and walk through what that looks like according to the scale.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is the scale that we've been chatting about. So there's effort, art, and science. Without reading every bullet here, effort, it's the muscling out of everything. Art is that intentionality and recognizing the patterns. And science is utilizing data and patterns so that way we can scale efforts. So Dan, this is all based on your work and your blog. So I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Kyra. When you think about work, oftentimes we use the metaphor of kind of running on a treadmill, and you can get up, wake up, and stand on the treadmill, run hard, get up and finish. And when you think about our new future, right, the economic pressures, the employee experience pressures, right, you've got from an economics perspective, you've got inflation, you've got competitive forces, you've got innovation that's kind of creating all kinds of transitions in the marketplace. From an employee experience, you've got working remote, the increased focus on well-being, the great resignation. All this is challenging leaders to be way, way, way more intentional on how they think about running hard on that treadmill, right? This is not just about effort anymore. It's being thoughtful around how you use the energy within that effort, and really what does working hard mean? I think when you have these moments in life, whether it's because of the last 5 years and the changes around health, mental health, racial injustices, or anything else that the world has been dealing with, it causes those reflective moments where, why am I working hard and what am I working hard for? And so leaders need to understand that, both balancing what the organizational needs are and the individual.
Absolutely, absolutely. And on your side, Ike, anything to add to that on adding and balancing all of those various pieces?
I think that as you look at, both from an organizational perspective and also from an individual perspective, that we're all intrinsically motivated in different ways. But this is a one clear way in which we can kind of clearly define how we work and what that looks like. And so I think we'll touch on later, what are some of the key triggers? What are the key things that help us identify what we're doing, being self-aware, creating some level of readiness that can help us grow and push forward, but ultimately, in a direction that's going to be, very consistent with the desired outcome that we're looking to achieve. So I'm excited to kind of speak to some things here moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think from, everyone has a different reason to be in a different space. So there's no, oh, art's always better than effort, right? This is about being appropriate for what's needed now. Effort is that super scrappy space where you just outwork the work. And if you've ever gone for, a long walk, or, one of the examples we used in the blog was around the baker that loves the second sheet of cookies better than the first sheet. That's not me, but through research. And I've done a lot of research and testing on cookies. But that art then gets into the patterns of effort and says, what's the rhythm? What's the right timing of the rhythm there, right? And it starts to aggregate some of the best practices in the effort and create more flow, more mojo. And the science just comes from taking the rhythm of the art, right? And then starting to study the iambic pentameter or the whatever the rhythm might be, and sitting there and saying, how do we scale that? How do we replicate that? Right? How do we bottle it? How do we study the patterns of what are happening? This applies across so many different, you can just take this and even think about how we train our hearts to operate, right? And you can think about, you can just go hard charge after a workout and put a lot of effort in and say, okay, I can feel it pounding, right? And then there's like, okay, I want to get it to a point where it's working hard and I can feel it working hard, but I'm not necessarily studying my blood oxygen levels, right? And then there's, wearing a heart monitor, and right, like there's all different ways. The same thing applies to all of what we do with our work, whether it's at home with our families, in kind of the athletic realm, or from a business perspective, whether you're working across, like you do, like across multiple businesses, right? Managing different, to some degree related, but other degrees unrelated, or you're working within one business and you have multiple projects within that one business.
Correct. Yeah, this is, I think, awesome, because for me, I realize that even as a leader or an officer within a company, it helps me evaluate the totality of that work's being done, not just personally, but organizationally, and how are we progressing towards, some of our clearly defined goals. And what I'll say is, it's even presented a really good opportunity for us to now discuss someone who potentially is unstuck, right? Or stuck, and being able to help them get unstuck through being engaged or an active participant, so that they can get on this scale, and now we can start moving them forward. And so this is a great tool that I think we've done in various ways, but this is a much more clearly and concise way in which to now approach taking someone, kind of from that beginning phase of like, hey, yes, I understand you come up, you show up every day, you work, but now let's talk about how you're working, right? And how are you growing personally?
So part of our focus here today is to talk about the what and the how, but we want to make sure we ground everybody in the three models. Kyra, let's dig into the second one then. So go ahead.
Yep.
Nope, slide before there.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
There we are. This one here?
Nope, next one.
This one, right?
So we talked about the effort versus the science, art versus the science, at a very high level, so that we can understand what the three are and how they're different, right? Let's talk about how they work in these moments. So a lot of what we're talking about is grounded in self-awareness. And for me, self-awareness stems from an experience I had actually going into the Barnes Foundation. And it was an experience where I was actually sent into the Barnes Foundation as an undergrad to look at the people looking at the paintings, right? So the metaphor didn't really resonate for me as a college sophomore, right? But later in life, I started to reflect on that moment and thinking there's so many instances where we're so driven to just look at the painting, the task, right? The decision, the metric that we're chasing, right? And the reality is that what makes us able to show up better to serve the team is not just to look at the painting, but to look at the room looking at the painting. And in Barnes's collection, it's not just the one painting that he was very particular about. It was actually about how all the paintings interacted with each other in one wall, in one room. He was very particular in terms of the layout of that. And so what this visual does in terms of mindsets, moments, models, and measures is it connects individual thinking actions and systems with organizational thinking actions and systems. So let's talk about what that means. On the individual side, we all come to the table with a mindset. Our life experiences influence our mindset. While Kyra, Ike, and I are all parents of boys, right? We have different experiences that have led us and guided us through being the hopefully really great parents that we are. So it influences our mindset, right? So we're really thinking about recentering on our thinking to advance inclusion around these moments, right? The moments are the instances where we have an opportunity to think differently because of our mindset around the model. And the models are in place organizationally on how work gets worked, right? That's where it links back to effort, art, and science. The measures are how we keep track of whether or not a model is or in fact performing up to snuff, right? So it's like a KPI or a metric, right? That you're sitting there saying, we've got to hit this dollar mark, or we've got to sell this many, or we've got to hit this deadline, right? Is it in a green, yellow, or red based on the measures that we're putting in place? The measures define what the models are going after, but the way that we and our mindset approaches a moment influences whether we embrace the model as it exists today or challenge it in a healthy way to sit there and say, well, maybe it shouldn't be this way. Maybe it should be this way. Go ahead, Ike.
No, I was going to say that's awesome, because you're looking at a group of individuals, collective as a team, and you're saying, based upon this skill set, the talents resident within the group, right, down to the individual level, what's the best model for this optimum success? And that's plug and play. And at that point, now you can establish and create those measures. I look at coming into an NFL locker room long time ago, back in 1999, Peyton Manning's second year. My job as a rookie is to make the team. It's very singular focused. Like, I love the Colts, but Isaac wants to make the team. Now you make the team. Now I'm transitioning more to a more corporate attitude, right? I know that I'm safe. I know I'm on the 52-man active roster. So now my mindset shifts to more of the team goals. Now I have to be a contributing member, in the receiver room, special teams, do whatever you can to kind of help the team win. And, we draft Edgerrin James that year, and we're putting players in positions to help us win. And now we're starting to craft what that model or the playbook is going to look like, right? To now highlight the skill sets of individual team players, AKA superstars, right? Your all pro athletes. And then we're measuring that on a weekly basis. How productive, how successful are we with the plays that we have created, right? Or the schemes that we've come up with, right? And this is no different. I apply this same model to, my organization here in the wealth management business. I look back at my past results of a long time ago, a lot of effort, traveling to the combine, going to go see these guys at ball games. I mean, I'm all over the place, but I'm spread extremely thin. Then I take a step back and realize through self-awareness that that's not as productive. So at that point, now I'm actually turning to, let me just focus and on my existing clients and pour into those relationships. From there, I extract the results that I'm getting, and I'm realizing that, man, I'm more successful than I was before and a lot more productive by virtue of how I've reallocated my focus. And from that point, now I'm continuing to refine that process of being selective in the relationships that I work with, how I work with those individuals, and I just keep rescaling that. And so it speaks perfectly to the model which you just clearly laid out there with that slide there, Dan.
Yeah, thanks. Go ahead, Kyra. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. I was just going to say one piece that I hear coming through from both of you all is around that self-awareness, right? And so I know, Dan, obviously you've done a ton of work around the self-aware leader and calling yourself and looking inward so that way you can that can focus it and drive what you're doing outward. So I'd love for if you could just kind of take a few moments and speak to how that self-awareness plays into the model, plays into effort art science, and how work is worked.
Yeah, thanks, Kyra. The self-awareness principle kind of ties off of that Barnes Foundation story, right? In looking at the painting and stepping back and seeing what's going on around the painting, both on the wall and literally in the room. My exercise of having to watch people watching the paintings brought me to a space where the self-awareness was simply defined as slowing yourself down to speed yourself up, right? And I just gave a perfect example of his experience with the Indianapolis Colts and then within his business today, where it's looking around the room to see what is needed, right? What is needed to help you individually move forward, the team move forward, and the organization move forward. And just like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you're going to start first with yourself. And once you feel safe, then you will extend to others. And then once you see the momentum of that, it will become more holistic. What this visual does here on the right side of the slide is it lays out the 4 different ways that you can bring this self-awareness as a teammate, right? And so let's forget about hierarchy in the term leadership, right? This is about role clarity. And part of that role clarity can be defining and anticipate what needs to be done next. And a lot of that exploratory, visionary, creative work oftentimes can sit under the umbrella of being a leader. Conversely, right, a manager is orchestrating, right, how to get the work done through themselves and or others. And that logistics, that operational element of management comes through. A facilitator can bring together different parties and get to agreement or consensus, right, to help move the work forward, but they may not actually be doing the work. Their job may be literally to connect Group A and Group B to come together. And then the producer is actually someone that's doing the work. And regardless of what title and level and how much experience all of us has, we all play all 4 of these roles. But hearing Ike's story actually made me think of there's a great faculty member at Drexel University, Dr. Bob Keidel, who used to talk about leadership from the sports perspective relative to, you know, what kind of leadership do you want to play? Because leadership in a football game looks different than leadership in a baseball game, then different than a basketball game, right? Whereas the decision-making responsibility, the play calling responsibility, the reading the situation responsibility, the power, if you will, is dispensed differently across, you know, each of those 3 different sports.
Absolutely. And so, from your experience with all of these pieces, when you're trying to marry all the effort, art, science together as a leader or manager, facilitator, or producer, like where do you see your greatest opportunities to, you know, be more reflective of the skill, and which one do you find that you play the most?
I really feel like results are a trigger for me.
Okay.
You know, you can't hide from, you know, the P&L statement. You can't hide from, you know, if I'm submitting, let's say, RFPs, and yeah, either I'm winning some or I'm losing some, right? So for me, that always is a cause for reflection. Also, when I'm looking at why am I not advancing or moving further ahead in certain relationships? You know, what's the part that I have to play? So these are things that I'm naturally inherently sensitive to. And so they always create that moment of self-reflection for me. And then from that standpoint, I'm able now to kind of self-evaluate, well, what role did I play? Was I the producer in that? Did I do the end result? Could I have served as a facilitator to now be more collaborative to move something forward? And so I realized that individually, I'm moving in and out of those roles consistently.
Right.
Because there are different groups of people that I'm working with on different tasks and projects. There's different organizations, but even more so, and Dan, I know this probably happens to you a lot, is that when you're at the outset of a new relationship, you're trying to figure out, okay, what role am I playing in this relationship? Right. You know what I mean? How am I coming to this situation? You know, what part of myself am I engaging is going to be most productive for this successful outcome, or just to make the relationship work? And that is a nuanced thing. That's the science of what it is that we do, right? Yeah. From taking our previous past experiences, bringing it into this moment, and now defining or trying to figure out, like, okay, who would I need to be today? I've had clients run hot and cold, and I've had to shift, you know, roles, right? Because of that situational moment. The last thing I'll say is this, is that, and to me, this gives me chills because I live in this space quite a bit, is that, Dan, I'm not always ready for every moment.
Right.
You know, the first time you play at the Horseshoe and it's north of 100,000 people, there's nothing that can prepare you for it because you've never been there. Right. So there are going to be things that come about that's going to force you to have to rely on some past experience, even if you haven't had it, but you're going to have to figure that out on the fly. And that's the beauty of this. Right. Is that it's creating that track record for you to establish moving forward.
Yeah. And that's where the physical and the leadership side plays together, right? Because you are drawing on your experiences no different than your body will draw on your muscle memory, right? Mm-hmm. The first version is, as goofy as it sounds, the first version of this scale was, do we need a Schwinn, a Honda, or a Mercedes, right? Yeah. Like to get from point A to point B, right? And it was about working with different leaders and different teams and coaching them around what's the right level of investment of time and what's the right level of investment on effort, right? Huge fan of the growth mindset principles that Dr. Carol Dweck has put out on the table. And if you've never read her book, it's an amazing 200 pages of just beautiful research and practical application. But I think it's really relevant here because we always focus on return on investment, right? Mm-hmm. Part of this model starts to look at return on effort. And what that's where I think that the return on effort is around, okay, how much effort does it take, right, to make this work? And would going from a Schwinn to a Honda and having a better tool, would that investment create a better employee experience, a better customer experience? Or do we need to get bigger first in order to afford that investment, right? Or do we need to get bigger to have enough scale that the tool that we're investing in, which moves us from effort to art, right, is thoughtfully getting us to, okay, we have a big enough base and a critical mass. Now we can, right? You know, so like all these pivot points are really around leadership. Do you build the base before you before you launch the tool? Or do you launch the tool so that you're prepared to build the base, right? There's no right answer. It's all situational. And that's where the self-awareness comes in, is listening to your customers, listening to your teammates, right? And sitting there and saying, okay, if our goal is to get bigger or move faster or turn left instead of turning right, you're trying to proactively anticipate what do you need to shift.
I think you called out a really important piece there, is that first bit around determining what you're going to use. Is it the Schwinn? Is it the Honda? Is it the Mercedes? And after you have made it to that step, then kind of working through that scale. So it sounds like for each pivot, like for each point, you have to still work through that scale kind of repeatedly as you're moving through. On your side, do you have any examples of times where you've been in that same kind of situation where you're determining what do I need? Like, what's that first piece before I can even move effort art science? What's that first step to take, and how do you determine that?
I think for me, it happens numerous times a day. And what I mean by that is that, sometimes when I pick up the phone, I don't know who's on the other end. And when you get advised, when you're being brought in to advise on, opportunities, now mentally you're starting to move pieces around the chessboard, right? You're having to prioritize, you're having to identify all the pertinent and material information, right? So that you can synthesize that and now create a process or a roadmap forward. What are the dominoes that need to be knocked down first to kind of get this thing going? And so for me, very much so, what Dan alluded to earlier is I'm drawing on past experiences, right? So for me, when I'm coming in and a athlete is saying, I want to have a following of this, I want to have curated marketing endorsement deals here, and I want to be able to retire at this age. Now you have to put things in sequential order and what that looks like. You have to do first things first, which is I need you to be the best at your craft possible, because that's going to be the springboard, right? And the conduit for everything else that comes, right? I need you to be best of breed in your field. And then from there, we can leverage your name, your image, your likeness, and create, buzz around some of the other things that you want to do off the court. And so it's often a recalibration or a resetting expectation of what needs to happen, because we get these two ideas of what should be occurring.
Right.
And we have to become unified in what the pathway is moving forward. And that process takes a little bit of time. So in that one conversation, in that point moving forward, there are times when I am the manager. There are times when I'm the facilitator, right? Does that make sense? And like I was telling Dan on our pre-call today, is that we know what the defined goal is or desired outcome, but there's going to be several ways in which we can get there. And oftentimes you're going to have to readjust midstream or after you get started. There's no way that organizations run Fortune 500 companies and they have this clearly defined path as to how they're adjusting all the time. You just can't see it. Your pension, for those who have them, behind the scenes, it's going up and down like this. You just don't see it. You see your statement. That's happening each and every single day. So too it is with a lot of these organizations. And so from that perspective, we're looking to kind of narrow that scope, get on the same page, draw from past experiences, leveraging previous moments to help establish, right, a process, a protocol, right, or a roadmap forward for us to abide by.
Yeah, I listened to you there, Ike, and it actually it takes me, Kyra, to the next slide, because when you think about working with one of those individuals that are looking to grow their athletic success, but also grow their success in wealth management, right? Like, this kind of ties back to what everyone thinks about kind of coming into work, which is, how do I do a good job and how do I make a difference, right? And so you can think about, like, okay, if I walk into work and I sit there and say, I'm going to come into work and my goal today is to create more wealth for me, that's different than I want to come into work and be the best that I can be, right? That mindset influences how you show up in the moments. And, a lot of how you embrace or push back on those moments is going to come back to what is the finish line measured as measures, and how those models feed that. A couple of quick examples that I can think through. I've run 2 marathons in my life, and I was fortunate enough to be amongst a couple of friends that had run them before when I ran my first time. And I was really approaching this under the model, right, of just effort. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, okay, you're going to at some point run 26.2, just get in really, really good shape. And it was wild because I learned from these colleagues that became very close friends because you're out on 2-3 mile runs together, just talking about everything, or 2-3 hour runs, not mile. And you're following a plan they put together. And it was really fascinating to see what my goals were and what I learned from an Excel spreadsheet, right? The first year I went through it, it was really around, okay, I had a number 1 goal to finish, a number 2 goal to smile, and a number 3 goal, if I got to it, was to hit a time parameter. And the second time when I went at it, I wanted to again finish, smile, and hit a better time barrier. And the second time I went after it, the folks that I was running with, they were coaching me around cross training, not just running, right? But specifically, guess what? The reason you got tired at the end was because of your upper body strength. And I think the same thing applies to how we think about work. Kyra, you and I have that relationship through City Year. And the evolution of City Year, for those of you that aren't familiar, is they work in our public school system to help fight the dropout crisis. When City Year was first founded, they would work with lots of different schools, right? Schools that raised their hand and said, "I'm part of the AmeriCorps program. I want to partner with you. Let's bring in some folks to help supplement the resources that we have in the school and drive more graduation from high school." What was fascinating is over the evolution of City Year in their first 10, 15, 20 years is they started to really pinpoint, one, the behaviors that drove the success of those students, and two, they started to pinpoint the schools that were the most significant contributors to the dropout crisis. And they became laser focused, right? And started to make movement, right? Make movement by having that greater focus. I think the same thing applies to all of what we're working on. Is in the beginning, right? You're just going to walk onto that field and hustle. And then after you play a couple of games, whatever it's project management or sales or customer service or nonprofit sector, after you get through a couple of games, you're going to have a point of view because you're now experienced and informed in a way that you weren't before you played on that field. And that will start to shift the way that you think about what's your mindset, how will you approach those moments, and are you going to advocate, you know what, it's time to think about moving from effort to art to science, right? Are you ready for it? Is the rest of the team ready for it? Is whomever the team serves ready for it? Are they already asking for it? And how do you manage through that? So just a couple of thoughts there, and I'll pause and get any reactions that either of you have on those.
Yeah, I was going to say my first is those are two wonderful examples, right? So the first being a personal bit, right? So you're going from that effort, muscling through a marathon to the art of tracking and then using that for scalability on the science side of things. And the same thing with City Year. I'm a very proud City Year alumni of Los Angeles's core. And so I certainly have seen a lot of the evolution of City Year and the way that even in my year of experience, we changed the modality that we were going and that we were using in the school that I served at. So I certainly can see that for myself and from your examples. Would love to hear from you in terms of kind of how you've seen some of those progressions in your personal and professional life as well.
What Dan was saying, that with the self-awareness, with the self-awareness, that you really place a lid on the development. I believe you halt your, meaning that throwing a bunch of sweat equity, throwing a bunch of effort and doesn't take from your success, but I think it's short-lived because you're not really seeing how you're impacting others, right? Because you're just focused on what you're doing. And yes, but I'm getting results. But how is that driving? How is that influencing those who are the behind for the organization? How are you, collectively being integrated in a successful way to the greater good? And from that perspective, being coachable, you say, I'm good, but you have the ability to be great. And I think that can only come through the ability to be able to acknowledge right? To be able to be objective and partial to, yeah, I could have done something better. I could have gotten more out of myself if I would have been open to or leaned into this. And that's what's so important, is having that feedback, is having time to actually look back and say, yeah, here's an opportunity for growth. So I think that has to be built in. I think that's something that has to be accounted for at all levels within the organization, not just with, from the top down or just for, those who are being supervised. So, that is one thing that sticks out. But I'd also say, that in going from my first year into my second year, I wasn't as concerned about the playbook because I knew it. So coming into camp and training in the off season, my focus was on my growth and my knowledge, and now factors that influence my ability to keep my job: speed, right, footwork, quickness. So yeah, things get easier, right? But your focus will shift over time. And I think that's the thing that, how do you move a group of people together, right? Collectively, but you have to individually find those things that are going to help them progress, move the needle forward, so that now that model can continue to change. We want to keep pushing that model forward. And that's kind of how you're going to have to pull those levers to be able to do that, is during those individual times of reflection and feedback through self-awareness.
Yeah. You literally turned back the clock about 12 hours for me. I was coaching a 12-year-old last night on baseball. And I'm not a baseball expert by any stretch. But the coaching experience that he and I had was very, very similar to, some of the clients that I've worked with in different, leadership coaching engagements. The kid stepped up to the plate in practice and was ripping it like folks had never seen it before. And after he had this very successful batting practice, I went and just sat down with him quietly. And I said, wow, that was incredible. What is different for you on game day than it is here today? Because does it feel different? He said, yeah, it totally feels different. He's like, this is so relaxed. When I get up to the plate in a game, I'm nervous. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's start to unpack. Why are you nervous, right? Why can't you bring your full self? Why can't you relax and be your best self when the game is playing, right? And the same thing happens in our work environment every single day, where if you don't feel comfortable, if you don't feel safe, right, you're not going to play the game naturally the way that you would play the game. You're going to have some moments of hesitation, especially if you're new to the team or new to the game, right? You're going to be hesitant. So from a leadership perspective, how does this all apply, right? You've got to look for those moments where you can help someone step back and not just focus on the painting, right? Focus on their preparation, focus on their breathing, focus on what's their self-talk, right? And the same thing applies to whether you're trying to outmuscle a baseball or whether you're out trying to outmuscle 50 emails sitting in your inbox. It's really creating clear mind, clear direction, clear purpose, right? But a lot of it comes back to trust, right? Yeah. In the end, trust is about how will people treat me if I make a mistake, right? And so when you think about your mindset and your moments here and the self-awareness around those mindsets and the moments, and thinking about how you're going to adjust from effort, art, and science, it's not just about how it shows up on a great sunny day, right? Where you're sitting there saying, I think we should pivot from this to this, and it'll all be magical. Guess what? That pivot creates change, and that creates a moment of opportunity, but also creates moments of hesitation. And so how you as a leader show up in those moments of hesitation, right? If you don't unpack the fact that, hey, when you showed up in this, you showed up different. Why was that, right? I've seen it where people do it at year-end performance reviews and said, that was an amazing year, right? Kyra, you and I were talking about the other day, right? In a sales culture perspective, the number kind of grows every year, right? And so what was a B+ last year in your productivity If you do it again this year, it's probably a B. And if you do it again the following year, it's probably a B minus, right? And so you've got to progress from effort to art and science, because if you sit there and say, well, wait, I can't hustle anymore, right? I literally don't have the energy or the capacity to hustle anymore. That's when you know, okay, what is it, right? What is it that is drawing too much of your energy? Where is the return on effort imbalanced with the return on impact that you're trying to make?
Dan, the last point I'll make here is that I think the model, and I think about your boys who I've had the opportunity to meet. When I speak, to your oldest, right? I don't speak to your youngest in the same capacity. I can't put that model that I'd use on your oldest on your youngest. And I think we have to look at those that we're leading through the same lens, right? The model has to be appropriate, right? There has to be room for growth in there, right? There has to be that stretch in there, but it can't be so outrageous, right, that it dwarfs their skill set or their ability to be able to now produce or be productive.
Yep.
And I think that's the important balance, because, in college football, the expectations increase every single year. Coaches get fired with winning records. So, anything less than the year before is really never, ever, going to be acceptable. Like you said, Dan, numbers get larger and larger and larger. But how are coaches motivating their teams in spite of this goal that is going to increase year over year? That's it. They have the same group of guys, but they have to manage them in a way to get the best out of them, to get that desired end result. And I think we have to be cognizant of that. But if you never have gone through that, I think it's hard to manage someone else and give them autonomy, right?
Right.
Coach those differently, right? And I'll stop right there because I could kind of go on. But yeah, just making sure that we're putting the appropriate model in place for the team or that individual, goes without saying.
I think two pieces, just kind of as we're kind of coming to a close on those ideas that you all have both brought up are that self-reflection along with feedback from others. And so as we talk about how this works into the effort or science model, what tips do either of you have around, one, self-reflection? When do you pause at each of these phases for self-reflection to move to the next phase? And then secondarily, any tips and tricks around feedback, either giving or requesting feedback, so that way when it's time to move through the model?
Great questions, Kyra. I'd actually combine them both by answering that you got to start with the why, and you've got to balance the organizational why with the individual why. Whether you're talking about your family and your kid, or whether you're talking about your organization goals and your individual goals. I believe that we are all people first and employees second. And so why someone wants to work with you is going to be different, to the point that Ike just made around my boys or his boys or Kyra, your boys. And I think that understanding people's why helps you think about how to connect with them, right? How to maximize their discretionary effort, right? And really study what do they want to get out of this? Is it around outcomes? Is it around learning? There's so many different ways that someone can define more. And I think part of that is understanding that piece. More and more, the world is comparing themselves against others. And I think that oftentimes becomes one of the most misleading mistakes that folks can do, is because in the end, organizationally or individually, we should be aspiring to be our best self, whether it's that self as a company or whether that self is an individual. And so helping kids see the other paintings in the room is important for when they look at that painting that in fact is a mirror, right? Or whether that's a team member, right? To look in that mirror. And I just think that's so critical to increasing your self-awareness and and connecting with that person. If you can't connect with that person and build trust, then helping them shift from effort to art, that's going to be about an uphill climb with some rocks in your pockets. I think the why is critically important, right? If there's some great research out there on like blue ocean, red ocean, right? Blue ocean is competing against those you compete against every day. The opposite. Red ocean is those you compete against every day, right? Blue ocean is comparing yourself to something completely different. I think you can be informed by those, but just like your values, you can be informed by others' values. But in the end, you've got to define what your values, what your success definition is, what your outcome is, where you want to be. And so the more you can see the whole room and all the people in the room and not just the painting, the more informed you are, the more self-aware you are. But in the end, you've got to decide it for you.
Absolutely. Anything for you to add, chat, before we get into the chat and questions? Feel free to chat in any questions that you may want to have answered as well.
I think this scale is really for those who are driven, those who are motivated, those who want to be intentional about their growth, their development. But I'd say, the low-hanging fruit here for me is getting to the point of being able to ask for help. Hey, can you provide some feedback on this presentation I did? Can you help me look at, my last year's results? Like, what do you see when you look at it? Those are the things that really set you up for success, because now you're not trying to go at it on your own. You can have someone else's mind, leverage someone else's expertise, and preferably someone who's maybe been there to help advise and guide you. The second thing I think you have to evaluate is what I'm doing sustainable? Because you can go and stay in that effort phase so long that you'll burn yourself out, to where now the motivation to want to be intentional about, the self-awareness or wanting to optimize patterns for productivity will cease to exist just through to fatigue. You can prematurely fatigue just by, being all gas and no brakes, so to speak. And so for me, it's been humbling to be able to say, listen, I don't pretend to know it all. Can, you stand over my shoulder and help me evaluate this opportunity? How would you, draft this email, like on a smaller scale, right? Because I care about the work that I do, to the point that I don't think that it rises and falls with just myself, or I presume to have it figured out. So change is inevitable. We want to consistently grow. And I think we grow by different inputs. And those inputs are sometimes a feedback and criticism of others. And, what I will say is the ability to, accept and give feedback is critical to any organization's success.
Yeah, no, very, very well said. I think that's perfect. And I think it's really important, that feedback loop, asking for feedback, and also being part of that leadership is being able to offer that feedback to others, right? So we talked about the model and talk about different pieces, how do you facilitate feedback? When do you give it to others? And so, here at Exude, these are, as we're wrapping up, some of the core pieces that we're able to help others with are those pieces, right? How, when it comes to leadership development, DEI efforts within organizations and human resources and employee benefits, all places that we're able to offer and add value to. As we're closing out, I know that the chat just showed the link to Dan's blog for additional information and for follow-up there. Want to turn it over to each of you for any last words before we wrap up here.
Well, I loved Ike's focus in the end there. I think that really makes it real, because is it sustainable and is it fulfilling, right? Like, in the end, are going to influence how people feel about their work. And today, leaders are being challenged with connecting the volume with the value, right? And so, finding opportunities to talk to teammates and approach them as people first, and really sit there and say, what are you trying to get out of this chapter, especially to Ike's point around driven folks that really want to outgrow potentially the role that they're in. How do you help them, and how do you create a safe space for them to ask for help? It creates so much community around the work. It's a beautiful thing. So, and I'll just thank you, Kyra, for leading and facilitating this, and Ike, always a pleasure to talk about leadership and inclusion and coaching and progress. Really is, I think, kind of some of the themes of what we've talked about through the years.
No, listen, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here. What I'll say is that I learned that I don't want to be on the mountaintop by myself, you know? And so if there's no one standing there with me, then I didn't lead anyone. And so from that perspective, if you're a leader and you're not really pouring into those or considering, you know, your workforce and what it's going to take for them to do the job, right? All the way down to their individual skill sets, their family life, what they have going on outside here, and, you know, lay that upon the landscape that we have of what's going on here within the economy and, you know, COVID and things across the world, then you're really missing the boat, right? I think you have to lead those internally, right, to ultimately get to where you want to go. And so, yes, it's a dual mandate. And I know it's not easy. That's why you're in that position. You know, you're there for a reason. But to everything we've been speaking to is draw on past experiences. And if you can draw on someone else's past experiences in that moment, it can help you make a better decision in the present. So it doesn't have to be your moment. It can be someone else's moment. I can call Dan and say, hey, Dan, I don't have 4 boys. I have 2, right? You have one who's going to college. I have one for another year. I can call Dan and I can get that experience today to help me make that decision. That's what we have to be able to do. So don't stand on the mountaintop by yourself. I thank you guys for this opportunity. This has been wonderful. Exude is great. And I look forward to doing this again here soon.
Absolutely. Thank you all. And thank you all for attending. I hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon.